The Federal Reserve weighs in on what factors will steer monetary policy when it releases its policy statements. In its latest policy statement, the Federal Reserve tackles the labor market, the housing sector, and even energy prices. But somewhere along the line it failed to mention what could have the biggest impact on the American economy, the disaster in Japan. Here to discuss with my freedom fighters, Fox Business senior correspondent and my buddy Charlie Gasparino, radio host Leslie Marshall, and Mises Institute chair Lou Rockwell. Charlie, to you first. Does Ben Bernanke just say whatever comes to mind, or does he have an obligation, even though you know I think he shouldn't have a job and the Fed shouldn't exist, does he have an obligation to address seriously those things which will affect monetary policy?
You think this is going to affect we're going to print more money because of this?
Tell me.
I don't think so.
You don't think that there will be an effect in the United States?
I don't think we will. I don't think.
Don't they own about $1 billion of our debt?
Listen, it's a tragedy. They are not big buyers of our debt. They hold our debt. They're not big buyers of our debt anymore. And I don't think that this is going to affect monetary policy.
Lou Rockwell, what do you think?
Well, I think, Judge, that the Fed is like the little boy who's afraid to open the door in his bedroom because the boogeyman might be in there. So it's, I think, very possible that the Japanese will have to start to liquidate their treasury debt, and it'd be a great thing because it would put a lid on federal spending. They actually would have to cut. All those Republicans who blab about cutting would actually have to cut the budget. It'd be a wonderful thing.
Lou, you don't think there's going to be a flight to quality and people buying treasury bonds because of this? I mean, the Japanese are major sellers of their own government debt. Japan is where we might be if we keep going the route that we're going right now. There will be a flight to quality if this occurs. That means all those Japanese who sell their bonds, there will be buyers for those bonds.
Should we, Leslie Marshall, be looking to Ben Bernanke for advice about what he's going to do in the future? Or does he just have the right to pop anything he wants on us? You secretly think that, don't you?
In his position, well, I'm not a huge fan of his or of the Reserve, too, Judge. But I have to tell you, I'm going to take a chick slant on this. It's not the time, guys, whether it affects policy or not. I mean, please, do we have any kind of a time frame? One, because it's too early to see what's going to happen financially. And two, do you need to be a rockist to know, hey, we have a tsunami, we have an earthquake, we have 3 explosions and 2 fires and radiation leaking. Let's not talk about their money when they're trying to find their kids and figure out who's dead and alive.
With all due respect, if this did have an impact on monetary policy, a legitimate impact, he has an absolute obligation, duty to disclose and discuss what that is. I just don't think it does.
All right. Did oil go down today?
It went up and down.
All right. Why would it go down? Is it because the speculators think Japan will consume less oil because they're falling apart?
Judge, I can give you 40 different reasons. I mean,
none of which has to do with Japan.
But here's the thing. Think about it this way. The price for any given second doesn't matter. It's the long-term trend. I mean, listen, I can interpret Japan.
It shows that, it shows the weakness of the American economy, that with all that's going on in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, oil is going down. That's what that shows.
But then it went back up. I mean, you can I just would caution people from extrapolating minute to minute the price of oil on this. Yes, Japan
we were told
recovers,
it was going to be $200 a barrel.
Right? If it uses less nuclear power, it's going to need more oil. If the economy is in the dump for a while, well then it may.
Now you sound like a professor of economics.
I'm just saying, how do you know?
Go ahead, Lou. I'll give you the last word on this before we switch gears.
Hey, I love oil. I hope we have more oil. Pump that oil, guys.
All right, pump that oil. The government will likely avert a shutdown yet again with yesterday's passage in the House of a bill to fund the government for the next 3 weeks while making $6 billion in cuts. $6 billion in cuts wasn't enough for 54 Republicans who voted against the funding extension. Can the House Speaker John Boehner keep his party from fraying apart over fiscal matters? What do you think, Charlie? I mean, we spend $45 billion a day. These guys authorized the president to spend for 3 weeks, and they cut $6 billion.
I know
that is not a drop. That's less than a drop in the bucket.
It's actually a pretty much of a joke. My big problem with these guys is that there's no growth agenda. I hear, all the Tea Partiers talking about cuts, cuts, cuts. People are unemployed still in massive numbers. We do not have a growth agenda coming from the Republicans. I'll tell you, that means that Barack Obama, if this keeps going, will be president for another 4 years.
Isn't the growth agenda that taxes should be less and the government should stop borrowing, Lou Rockwell, so that individuals and collections and groups of individuals have more money of their own to invest? Isn't that the growth agenda?
Of course, Judge, that's right. I don't think it's probably a good idea to be cutting taxes when we're running these kinds of deficits. We need a smaller government.
You want higher taxes?
That's what we need.
Lou, you want higher taxes?
No, but we need a smaller government We could cut spending, cut taxes, cut regulations, close Washington, D.C. 1 day a week, whatever we can do to close down this tremendously out-of-control government. That's what we need.
Leslie, wear your...
The Bush tax cuts.
Wear your Democratic hat, Leslie. Do the Democrats in the House want to force the hands of the Republicans to prevent the president from borrowing more money? Stated differently, who will gain if there's a government shutdown? The White House and the Democrats or the Republicans? This is not 1995. There is a Tea Party. There are millions of people who believe what Lou Rockwell just nicely summarized.
Actually, nobody benefits, Judge, because you're right. This is not the Clinton White House, and Boehner is not Gingrich, and this is not the economic times of '95. It would hurt most of the American people. It could be political suicide either way. And quite frankly, let's be honest, if the Democrats were really going to benefit from it, then the Democrats would let it happen. They're not letting it happen. By the way, as a Democrat, we want cuts, but it's what we cut. There's no defense cuts from the GOP. There's no entitlement cuts from the GOP.
Cut the military,
this is a show.
Absolutely.
This is nothing but a show.
The Democrats want the Republicans to be the party of no. And
right.
Continually talking about, listen, I'm for
No,
cuts.
I like the division.
They want
the division, Charlie.
You don't want us to articulate a growth strategy because Mr. Hope and Change is going to come in.
You are talking to three people, and most of the people watching us, who do believe that the Defense Department should be cut. You know that from being on the show by now. What does Wall Street think? Wear your other hat, Charlie. When the government goes 2 weeks here and 3 weeks there, no business, no household could operate on a 2-week or a 3-week budget.
Wall Street is the wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. It has been for a long time. You know that because
I know that because I read it in a book called Bought and Paid For.
And when the Republicans threaten cuts, guess what Goldman Sachs did? It comes out with some dopey report saying how that's going to slow down the economy. And this is what the problem for the Republicans, that they are becoming the party of cuts. Yes, talk about cuts, but have a real substantive growth agenda. Put it on the table. Push that while you're jamming cuts down there.
Lou, we got about 30 seconds. I'll give you the last word. How absurd does the government look when it goes in 2 weeks here and 3 weeks there, rather than a budget people can rely on?
Well, it does look absurd, but the whole budget is a problem too. A year budget of all this extra spending and all the extra regulation, all the things that Obama and Boehner, by the way, want to do to us. That's the problem. We have a growth agenda. It's the growth of government. It's the wrong agenda.
All right. Lou Rockwell, Charlie Gasparino, Leslie Marshall, thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure. Up next, the plain truth on the government passing debt from generation to generation.